This is an audio recording of the Dry Pond Loop post. This hike was completed in Reno, Nevada on May 26, 2024. Let's start with the disclaimer. For the past 2 years, a better description of me is a woman who wanted to be in the woods. After making it a point to hike every weekend from June 2020 through April 2022, I broke my streak. There are any number of reasons why, ranging from moving to a new state, losing my hiking buddies, starting a new job, setting up a new house, and having the crazy idea to start a crafting side business out of my home. I kept telling myself I owed it to myself to start hiking on a more consistent basis again. But the longer I went without hitting the trails, the easier it got to deprioritize the outdoors. And I'd be lying if I said having lost my hiking gal pals wasn't a huge part of my outdoors despondency. I haven't been completely absent from the outdoors. I garden, and I would go on infrequent walks or hikes, but there was a little voice telling me it wasn't enough, that I was ignoring a huge part of who I wanted, maybe even needed to be. So I finally decided to woman up and recommit to getting back out into nature. This hike was something like a pledge to myself, and maybe to my grandma's legacy, to return to the outdoors. All Trails said Dry Pond Loop was supposed to be just over 6 miles. The navigation tracker in All Trails calculated my hike to be over 8 miles when all was said and done. I didn't deviate from the suggested trail by 2 miles, trust me. Based on the map provided in the print version of this post, 6 miles probably is closer to the truth, so I can only guess that the spotty GPS in this area accounts for the difference. Thankfully, even though hiking hasn't been part of my weekly routine, yoga and dancing have been, so my body wasn't completely out of shape. The only thing yoga and dancing couldn't prepare me for was the elevation. Where I live is around 4,000 feet, and my lungs made it clear that they weren't prepared for the 2,000-foot elevation change from home. This trail starts near a small mountain community. Many local residents hike shorter legs of the longer loops and trails, often with a pup or two at heel. I felt a little overdressed in my hiking apparel and gear. No fashionable leggings and cute little fanny pack for this girl. What happens if I have to traverse less hospital areas? Where would I store my 3 liters of water? Or my water filter? Or my first aid kit? Or binoculars? Or solar light and charger? Or anything else that I tell myself I need should I end up getting stuck in the woods overnight unexpectedly? Some might call me an overpacker. I call myself well prepared, but an ultralight hiker I will never be. Not long into the hike, I noted a familiar smell. Campfire. But that didn't make any sense, it not being nighttime and there not being any camping allowed in the area. My curiosity was soon tempered when I noted the telltale signs of scorch and char on the trees in the ground story. Unlike our neighbor to the west, California, our forest managers make good use of burn piles and prescribe burns, and that was clearly what I was seeing. Given the number of residences nestled up against this wild space, keeping fire fuel at a minimum is a necessity, and doing controlled burns here at the start of spring, when temperatures are still cool and the ground is still flush with snowmelt, the risks are outweighed by the reward. What was amazing was how many pioneer species were already adding their splashes of green to the blackened landscape. Ragwort was really trying to steal the show, with its somewhat messy yellow blossoms thrusting boldly upward from its unassuming weed-like foliage. But the plant that caught my eye was snowplant. This wildflower was one that my grandmother and I would always look for when we arrived for the summer in Red's Valley, and maybe that established in my mind that this was an uncommonly unique wildflower. Truth be told, they actually kinda are. By the time we arrived in the campground for our summer visit, it would have been warm for at least a month, and many of the snow plants had already come and gone. After doing some research, this particular plant deserves its own spotlight in the Nature's Classroom section, but if you're impatient and want to learn more, you can visit the linked site from the United States Forestry Service Plant of the Week in the printed version of this post. After hiking for so many years in Arizona, where water was an ultra-precious resource and not a common trail feature, I feel blessed whenever a waterway provides its gurgling, chuckling accompaniment to my trek. Hiking this trail in the counterclockwise direction, White's Creek was my first riverine companion and served as my soundtrack until I turned on the Dry Pond Trail. There was much evidence along the stream bank that what appeared to be a tame, well-contained little creek now, at some point had raged well beyond its banks, tearing down small trees and branches and depositing debris at least 6 feet to either side of its current path. For the first leg of this hike, I was comfortably sheltered by Jeffrey pines, ponderosa pines, white fir, and something scrubby and deciduous that I don't know the name of. I'm tempted to call it an oak, but I don't know for sure. If you've never hiked through a forest of Jeffrey pines, close your eyes and imagine the smell of vanilla, or butterscotch, or baking chocolate chip cookies. There. Now you know what it's like. Or close enough, at least. I always make a point of getting up close and personal with at least one Jeffrey pine per hike. Place my nose as close as I can without inhaling bark or insects, and take a big whiff. Warm, vanilla-y, butterscotchy, and positively scrumptious. There were times during this first leg that I literally had to remind myself to breathe normally, because I was beginning to feel lightheaded from trying to suck up as much of the scent as I could. I tried to look up if there was a definitive understanding of how and why Jeffrey pines release this scent, but my findings were inconclusive. I'll get back to you. Once I turned onto Dry Pond Trail, the flora opened up and shrank down. Thick stands of pine gave way to more dispersed specimens and shrubs. Manzanita, sagebrush, and Indian paintbrush became dominant species. Sunburn became a relevant concern. I spent less time looking up and more time trying not to trip over the rocks sticking up out of the dry, sand and gravel-covered trail. If it weren't for the evergreens and creeks still audible in the valley below, I could almost think I was back in Arizona. When something dark skittered across my path, naturally I had to stop, even at the expense of increasing my sun exposure. The plump, dark lizard, pictured in the printed version of this post, stopped atop a rock, gave me a stony side-eye, and executed several deliberate, and very intimidating, I might add, push-ups. They are quite adorable, aren't they? As a bonus for stopping to admire his impressive display, I also got to observe a fuzzy bumblebee nuzzling through the nearby sagebrush that was all abloom, as well as a vividly orange butterfly with tiny black spots. Sometimes you have to give yourself time to stop and watch a lizard. When I finally reached Dry Pond, it was a bit on the nose. I guess it deserves its oxymoronic name. What makes it eligible to even have pond in its moniker, might I ask? And why is it shown as blue on the maps? But it gave me an excuse to stop for a snack, a protein bar if you were curious, before beginning the descent to the last part of the loop. If you are curious at this point of why the name Dry Pond is rather comical, you'll have to look at the pictures in the printed version of the post. I found myself grateful at this point on a couple of fronts. I was back under tree cover and thankful for the cool shade of the pines, and it looked to be all downhill from here. choosing to hike the counterclockwise direction for the win. The descent and the last part of this loop would have been a beast to hike up, especially considering my lack of hiking experience in the recent past. As for a little piece of advice, if you're ever wondering if you're going to make it through some life challenge, go outside and observe the plant life. You will see plants growing in some of the most unbelievable circumstances. Take the trees in the picture in the printed version of this post. The two trees on the left picture, which could have been a single tree with a split trunk, not sure. They were just minding their own business when they were crashed into by another tree. This tree presented itself as a spear-like broken trunk that was jutting from in between the two other standing trees. Now, did they let that get them down? Did they just fall over and give up? No, they did not. They grew up and around the uninvited guest. And what you can't see in the picture is that the interloper is now part of the two supporting trees. Their bark has grown around the fallen stag, where they're in direct contact. Live like a wild plant and grow through your challenges. If you want to see a particularly good example of this using a cactus from my Arizona adventures, please click into the printed version of this post. You won't be disappointed. After descending down Thomas Creek Trail, which was much busier with foot and bike traffic, causing me to have to quickly step out of the way of several downhill daredevils, I was introduced to the second eponymous creek. This one was a little more raucous and lively than White's Creek, a little bit like a congratulatory jubilation for finishing the hike. At a different time in my life, when I was younger, more graceful of foot, and not one half of the financial security of my family, I would have been undeniably tempted to cross at least one of the 3 logs spanning Thomas Creek. Don't they seem deliberately placed to you when you take a look at the picture in the printed version of this post? As it were, I was content to stop and listen to the joyful rushing of the creek, splash a little water on my face, and thankfully make my way back to my car and the nearest bathroom. Thank you for listening to this audio version of the Dry Pond Loop hike reading. I do encourage you to look at the printed post. There are lots of great pictures in there from my adventure. And if this is something that you enjoyed, please subscribe to my Substack and consider following me for future podcasts. Thank you.